Hello and welcome to the IdeaCast interview series, episode number 140. My guest in this episode is Alexandra Beller. Alexandra is a choreographer, director, and teacher with over 25 years of experience in dance, theater, and process. And we unpack a whole lot more when I have Alexandra on in a moment and find out about what she does, where she's coming from, and some of the really amazing things that she's doing right now in aesthetics and the arts and dance and choreography and the methods and techniques. And it goes beyond that. The conversation widens quite a bit as we move through moment by moment. So I hope you all enjoy this conversation. I know I did, and I learned quite a bit from Alexandra, and I very much appreciate her being a guest, and I very much appreciate you all being here and listening to the conversation, especially my subscribers. Thank you. I would like to welcome Alexandra Beller to the IdeaCast interview series. As is typical with my guests that I bring on, I like to talk to them in a pre-meet, get to know them a little bit so that if this isn't a cold call. And I very much enjoyed the pre-meet call with Alexandra. So I welcome her, having a little bit of a grasp of her background, but we're going to find out more about Alexandra in a minute. But to YouTube audience, I welcome you, especially my subscribers, those of you that are subscribed. Thank you guys for being here, and I appreciate it. Alexandra, welcome. Glad to have you here. Glad to engage with you in this conversation.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Yeah. So let's acquaint the audience with your presence, your personhood, your vitality, and all your talents and your history. So if you don't mind, let's open up things, whatever you want to share, whatever you're comfortable sharing, either personally or, again, your career trajectory and all the wonderful things that you do. So I'll hand it to you, and I will be enthralled, much like the audience, in hearing what you have to say.
Thank you. I've had a fairly winding career, but I do feel like everything has linked pretty clearly to something before it. I started off as a professional dancer. I danced with a company called the Bill T. Jones Arnie Zane Dance Company, which is one of the big touring companies in the States. Fairly socially active, politically involved artwork, trying to push the boundaries. I left when I was almost 30. Because I really wanted to make my own work, choreograph, and I pretty immediately started a dance company, and met the person that became my husband. And I ran that dance company for 16 years as it was like a performance company where I would devise dance theater work with collaborators and hire set designers and projection designers and costume designers and lots of dancer actors, and we made a lot of work for about 16 years and did a bunch of touring. During that time, I was also teaching a lot of dance and got an MFA through a low residency program. So I was educating myself, educating others, creating and performing. And then I would say there was a big shift around 2015 when I decided that I really loved teaching, but I had so many different practices and forms that I'd absorbed over the years, so much information from so many different modalities, and I wanted a system that felt like an operating system for everything or an organizational system. So I went back to school and got a degree in something called Laban Movement Analysis and Bartenia Fundamentals, which is basically being able to analyze the human body and its movement for meaning. This field of work became a lot of different things in the world after its inception in the 40s, 50s, including a lot of applications in theater and dance, but somewhat more interestingly, maybe for your listeners, also became a lot of the underpinning of the field of nonverbal communication. So how we read the body, a lot of it did come from this work with Laban and Bartenieff. So I got my degree in that and started adding that to my teaching repertoire, but that allowed me to get into the back door of theater. So then I started choreographing for theater and let my company become more of an education company. So I create workshops and curate workshops with other teachers and, rent space and self-produce things, predominantly in New York. But then I started making during the pandemic a lot of digital content. So then I really kind of became an entrepreneur, and created a lot of coursework that I now sell. And eventually I started teaching at the Laban Institute to teach other people to do what I do. So now my many hats, and now I'm writing 2 books. And along the way I had 2 kids. So
Wow.
the trajectory, I mean, as you can see, things really did find a handhold with something that I was doing before, even though I feel like I've had and continue to have in some ways a lot of different careers. They feel quite united to me. And if I really probe the underpinning of everything that I'm doing, what I feel like unites it all are 2 things. One, I'm a very feeling person, like just in my body, in my emotions. That's a lot of how I live and relate to the world, is through sensing and feeling. I also have a scientific academic brain. So those 2 things are always talking to each other. But I feel very committed to helping people listen to themselves more deeply, to get in touch with their wants, needs, desires, feelings, authenticity. And that can be an actor in a play. It could be a private client that I'm seeing for Barteniev. It could be one of my students. It's in my book. So I feel like even though it may sound like I do a lot of very different things, what's underneath it is an interest in celebrating, feeling, sensing, intuiting, and celebrating logic, analysis, and structure, but not letting them compete with each other. And that's a lot of what one of my books is about. And the other thing that I think underpins it all, and I think that this feeling thing underpins this, is healing. That I'm interested in healing. Even when I'm like coaching an actor on their embodiment in a play, there's something about healing that's in it for me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that prompts a question in the craft, in the performers and the people who you interact with. I wonder, is there this underlying default mechanism of therapeutic value that goes on that may not be the key driver for why they do? They want to express, they want to be artistic and do what they do. But I can't help but wonder if there's also this kind of bonus, ancillary kind of therapeutic catharsis or healing or whatever's going on. Do you notice that in your peers and your clients that you work with who may not?
Myself, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean,
okay.
I think it can be a little bit scary for a performer to really dig into what makes them want to perform, because I think sometimes there is some need or void or want or trauma underneath there where, one reason, I'm not saying this is why everybody performs, but one reason is like, I've not felt visible enough in my life and I want to be more visible. And getting on a stage and, being clearly visible and feeling yourself seen is something that could be really healing for somebody.
Yeah. I totally get that. And what a great way to manifest that too. You're making yourself vulnerable. You're terrifying yourself, but at the same time, that your audience is going to be hopefully loving and charitable, not like the vaudeville acts where they threw tomatoes at you, but they're in reciprocity with you. And I think you are vicariously, and this is something I thought about when I was researching your work, you're affording them, the audience, that vicarious experience of the courage and the artistic expression. So if I'm stifled or if I'm a little withdrawn in terms of my creativity and I'm there experiencing this person who is being as vulnerable as we can get. I mean, if they were naked, they'd be ultimately vulnerable, but like just in costume, So anyway, I'm rambling, but yeah, that is just so powerful to enter into that reciprocity, I guess, with the audience.
Yeah.
They can take some of that away.
Exactly. And from the choreographic standpoint, and I'm just speaking from a personal point, not what I teach other choreographers to do, but for me as a choreographer, one thing that feels primary to me is that, and this is probably going to sound weird at first listen, but that the audience feels seen by watching my work. And what I mean by that is you're sitting in this theater, potentially like just sitting in a dark theater. Obviously, no one can physically see you, but they're watching work that came from a deep, authentic place in me. And for my work, I'm talking about some of the awkward, contradictory, challenging aspects of living life as a human being. And if I do my job well enough, my hope is that in the audience, someone looks at, a moment between two characters on stage, or a piece of text, or a movement, and they go, yeah, that I feel that way.
Mm.
I feel that way too, but that felt so personal. You feel that way too. Everybody's looking at you doing this thing that feels like me. And so I think there can be something very potent about just simply watching a piece of art that has deeply arrived at authenticity.
Yeah, and along the lines of potency, when you have, let's just say, 100 people gathered in a small theater, and they enter into this kind of a congruity, or yeah, and if everybody, this is people showing up in good faith who appreciate the art and the craft and that particular species of theater that's going on, that if they're there in that good space, again, not to throw tomatoes at the stage or be super uber like, oh, this, I saw a better performance last week. If they're there to be drawn in and be appreciated, that collective, it could radiate out, in the lobby talk and the connections that are made in the audience when we're being vulnerable for your being vulnerable or the actor being vulnerable. So, my gosh, yeah, there's so much interconnectedness or interdependence on the whole system. And perhaps that's why theater is a big part of the human experience, right? Yeah. And it's tactile, it's 3D, unlike going to the silver screen. And it's just as, there's so much power to film, but you've got a live, fleshy person on that stage who, again, ultimate vulnerability. And then the audience, again, gives some of that vulnerability back. So yeah, talk about, healing. Yeah, that's just, it's so subversively wonderful.
Yeah, I love that you use the word subversively wonderful, because I do feel like I resisted using the word healing outside of my movement therapy practice, because I feel like a lot of people in the art world look at healing inside art as not real art. Oh, that's like movement therapy. That's not like art that's really, challenging culture and, doing something new and is aesthetically interesting and valuable. That requires some kind of toxic formula, abuse, etc. Healing, that's just for you. And I absolutely don't believe that. I think, when we think of some of the great works of literature, like, say, James Baldwin, Maya Angelou, those are things that, not only were in their own right amazing books, novels, etc. Any literature teacher is gonna be able to break down one of their books and, compare it to any other amazing author, and say that is absolutely, there's nothing different about it. And yet those books also were interrupting and therefore healing some parts of our society that were broken.
Mm-hmm. And the fact that theater and the dance arts can push these kind of social normatives and the boundaries, certainly to some people's beyond their discomfort zone, but in even jaded folks like myself, who I'm used to seeing provocative things, that if it gets me to think and open up, that's creating more space, and then it becomes a normative. It circles up to, it cycles into a normative. So, that we see this now, and it's there, and it's part of our human experience. So I like that aspect too, and that lends itself into that, that positively valent subversivity, if that's a word, the action of being subversive. But, I don't want to lump anything negative on subversive, because we have to break frame in society, to do that, and to make it happen. So,
yeah,
that has that utility. That's awesome.
Absolutely. Subversive to me is, I generally use it in a very positive context because
Hmm.
most of the things that we're looking to topple need toppling.
Yeah. Well, we're a culture of pathology anymore, and not to get into, social issues and stuff like that, but it seems like pathology is fortunately to the fore. It is, we are all expressing what it is, and we're all neurotic. We're all capable of all of this stuff, but that, it is part of the zeitgeist or the milieu or whatever of society that we all acknowledge that we can be in that part of, we can occupy the space of neurosis or depression or anxiety and things like that. And if there are outlets, these pressure valves, that allow that. And of course, we're such a diverse species and we're such a diverse culture in the West, that I can speak to, that, yeah, this is a mode or an outlet, and it's across the spectrum. It's song, it's theater, it's film, it's theater, all these things. But, with what you're teaching and what you're doing, both as the individual, but as the collective, the community, having to do that dance, if you will, of giving and taking and testing waters and seeing, yeah, sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes things fall flat, right?
Oh, there's nothing like art to put you in touch with, like the beauty, benefit, and resilience of failure.
Yeah. Now, I did want to ask this question, and this may be the perfect segue. Can you give us a story or an anecdote of maybe not you and yours, but going to theater, going to performance, and it doesn't have to be utterly like horrifying, but just something cute or funny that was a flub or, a miscue or something. You have a little cute little story about that? Because I was thinking about that when I was researching you. I'm like, things have to go wrong. And
Things have to go wrong. Well, there's like the genre of like things going wrong that are not your fault. And then there's the genre of things going wrong that was on me. Which one do you want to hear?
Oh, whatever you think is spicy and it would be an uplifting story for the audience. Or it could be a little like cringy. I don't care.
I'm not sure if this is uplifting, but I will tell you this story. It's not light, but
okay.
It was I think probably my most valuable artistic lesson around failure. That was really my failure. We've all survived all kinds of like, the electricity went out or the costumes didn't arrive or the, projectionist quit or whatever. Those are what they are. And often the creative recovery from them is better than, like happy accidents, better than it would have been before. This one was my very first professional piece that I ever choreographed. I had just left Bill T. Jones, August of 2001. I got my first gig at Bates College to choreograph a dance. I was super excited, nervous. I was choreographing this piece, dance theater piece, lots of text. It was supposed to be really funny, a little bit raunchy. It was about dating. I had, just left this touring company and I had just really started dating people again because I had been touring for 7 years and not really able to have any kind of consistency.
Yeah.
So I had gone on a bunch of dates and was, as you are, horrified by how hard dating is. Mm-hmm. And so I started choreographing this piece that was called The Shark Attack and Other Dating Rituals. And it was like really funny about, the way that we try to control each other, the way that we, kind of don't know ourselves and go on with a mask and people are responding to the mask, and funny and, poignant, but also, a little sexy. And anyway, I choreographed for about, I think, 2 days.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Saturday, Sunday, Monday, I had choreographed for 3 days and I had to be done by that next Saturday. So I only had like 5 more days until we were showing this piece, and I was going to leave Maine and they were going to perform my first work. So high stakes. So I said I left in August of 2001. This was September of 2001, and the Tuesday rehearsal was September 11th. And so I was up in Maine. I'm a New Yorker. I was up in Maine. Friend called me. September 11th is happening.
Yeah.
And, of course, rehearsals canceled that day, and I think potentially the next day as well.
Okay.
And so then I went in Thursday, and I'm 29 years old. No real education at that point around trauma, crisis, recovery, nothing. Like what I would do today is such a different completely different thing.
Hmm.
At the time, young, new artist, big ego, I was like, we've got to finish my piece. We've got to finish my funny piece about dating. So we've got to get back into it. And we've lost 2 days, And
Okay.
I was in total denial about September 11th, right? I didn't really face it, feel it until I came back home to New York. And
Oh,
then
yeah.
I was like a week behind everybody and it hit me. It was
Mm.
so distant for me when I was up
Okay.
there, in a little faculty apartment watching the news on a little TV. And it wasn't real to me. So I
Right.
wasn't really experiencing it. And then I certainly was not prepared to facilitate holding space for it in a room full of young artists. So I just pushed us forward through this piece that was like, stop making that piece. Listen to the
Mm.
moment, read the room, read the world, read
Yeah.
yourself, stop, regroup, turn it around. But I didn't. I tried to make this funny piece. And, we were all
Okay.
like forcing ourselves through this process. And then we, performed it in a showing. It was by far the worst thing I've ever made in my life.
Okay.
I learned so much from it.
Okay.
Now I know what I would do in that moment. And of course I'd say, we're stopping. We're just going to be together.
We have to mourn. Yeah.
We have to connect with each other. Let's do what we do to heal. Let's move. Let's sound. Let's speak. Let's touch. And we'll create something or we won't,
Okay.
and,
Mhm.
maybe some parts of what we've already made will end up being useful to us. Maybe they won't. We're not going to go into this with any preconceptions. We've never been here before. This is an unprecedented moment. We have to treat it as a completely unique moment in our lives and respond to it with complete openness and not knowing, instead of going into the room pretending I know something I don't know.
Yeah.
So, as I said, not a light story, but probably my most profound story about failure.
Okay. Okay. Now, technical question about that night. You had a showing. You did a show. Was it attended? And what was the room? What was the vibe?
It was attended, but nobody wanted to see a funny piece
Okay.
6 days
Okay.
later. No, that
Okay.
wasn't the piece that anybody needed in the room. It wasn't the piece that the dancers needed to dance. It wasn't the piece that the audience needed to see. It
Yeah.
was out of touch, disconnected.
Mhm.
I missed it. I missed it.
Yeah. But thank you for telling that story, because we were just talking about vulnerability, and that's a very candid anecdote, and I appreciate that, because if there's somebody out there listening that, we all have faux pas, and I could tell some cringy stories, but maybe you're helping somebody off the hook who's beating themselves up for something. So I appreciate that, and you learned from it. You are wiser. You are a wise person now. By that chain of events that were set forth from that day. So yeah, so thank you for sharing that. I think that's awesome. I want to talk. You mentioned forthcoming books. If we could get into that in a second. Also, the two methods that you were talking about, Laban and what is it, Bartenov? Bartenov. I'm sorry. I'll probably keep butchering that. So Bartenov.
Sure.
But for now, you got me. But speaking to what you just said, I watched one of your YouTube shorter videos, and it might even been a TikTok that was imported. And actually, I'll stop there for a second, pin that for just a second. And what you were talking about in Maine reminds me a little bit of the great comedians will also do really morbidly depressing things, like the 12 chairs that Mel Brooks did. You're used to yada yada yada, and the 12 chairs. My wife and I watched it, and we're like, what the yeah. And then when I'd go to art house theater when I was a youngster, like in my early 20s, and they were called Norwegian comedies, and there was one called The Matchstick Girl, which I can never find. It must be in a vault in Norway somewhere. Horribly depressing films, right? But they were Norwegian comedies. So now whether that's a total sarcasm, total irony, I don't know. But I took it like, I'm going to go see a Norwegian comedy. And there was a series of them, and they were all morbidly depressing.
Wow.
And, so anyway, kind of ties into what you were saying, but it's the mood, the room, the time, the context, zeitgeist, all that kind of stuff. And we learn from that. And I think that's why those great, and even comedians like Will Ferrell did was it Things We Lost in the Fire? I think that I could be mixing them up. Robin Williams did that 24-hour photo or something. I'm bad on recall, but I know a lot of, even yucca guys will go into something. Adam Sandler did that one with Téa Leoni. Oh my God, that thing was horrible.
And then even within their comedy, I feel like there's been a movement towards some real pathos and authenticity. And comedians like Neil Brennan, even Chelsea Handler, I feel like her last one, she talks about her brother dying when she was a kid and how that affected her life. And of course, Hannah Gatsby, amazing at this, in that they can ride that leverage or play that leverage between comedy and pathos in such a beautiful way. And of course, we know from our great late night hosts who are able to take things that are completely distressing and anxiety provoking for us and
make us laugh
light of them to a certain degree. And at least let us feel that camaraderie and comfort in yeah, it's crazy, right?
Yeah.
But I do think that humor has a unique ability to pierce the consciousness in a way that allows us to let it in more. So there's a massage technique called active release where you put your hand on a muscle, you apply some pressure, you ask the person to engage that muscle, and then when they release their engagement, your pressure is able to go in sort of like as they relax, you go in deeper.
Okay.
And you get to go in deeper in that massage practice than you would if you just applied pressure to their limp body. And that's what I think of as humor. It's like you sort of soften the receiver in a way. They're receiving you with this softness that we receive, with which we receive humor. And then while you're in, you go, and then look at that. And they're like, oh,
yeah,
right. Yeah, that's true.
Right. No, I totally agree. And that the massage, you could almost abstract that out to beyond somatic to family systems therapy and things like that, where you bracket things and then you penetrate, and there's that provocation type therapy where they want you to confront that. So it translates to these living systems as having efficacy, right, across spectrum or board, whatever it is. And the comedians that are spokespersons of what's going on. I read once that humor can be defined probably a couple different ways, but one of the ways is incongruity resolution. So we have an incongruous, messy, upsetting, but they offer you, like you said, it opens up a space that you can penetrate, and that resolution is where we can invoke the absurd and the macabre and all these things and feel a little more, walk away, I guess, or come away from that with some release, some catharsis from that. So thank goodness for comedians. Like your George Carlin types, or Lewis Black does it for me. I watch 5 minutes of him and I'm like, okay. He's so cynical, and I love cynicism. So it's like, okay, I'm good. Anywho, well, would you be okay with, I know they're forthcoming and not fully congealed or what's the other word? Anyway, coalesced. Yes, that's the fancy word I was looking for, coalesced. But would you like to tease us with a little bit, or should I have you back as a guest another time when the books are coming?
About the books? We can do both.
Okay, good.
There are two books. One I'm co-writing with a music conductor, band director, named David Vickerman. And that book is called Embodied Conducting. And it's a somatic approach to conducting with Laban and Bartenieff. So we're taking this field, which I haven't really talked about with you yet, but essentially what I was saying before, how to analyze the human body for movement. Bartenieff was a student of Laban, and then she developed her own whole field of practice in the States. Laban was at the time in the UK. He's an Austro-Hungarian choreographer and philosopher. And he had a lot of different types of people study with him. One of them was Warren Lamb, who's considered really one of the pioneers of nonverbal communication. He developed something called action profiling and movement pattern analysis. Judith Kestenberg was a student of Bartenieff, and she is considered one of the pioneers of child psychology. Yacht Malmgren was a student of Laban, and he was a major theater theater technique creator and director. And then Bartenieff was a physical therapist, and her husband was a theater director, and they came to the States during World War II to escape. He was Jewish. And she was working predominantly with kids recovering from polio. And so she started looking into babies, developmental movement, milestones. Also, some of what we know about how babies develop also came from her. So her material is really biomechanics. For me, biomechanics transcend the body, because this is the instrument for whatever you want to name: spirit, soul, psyche, the inner stuff.
Yeah.
Our wants, our needs, our feelings, our trauma, our memories, etc. The body is the vessel for it. And when you get more conscious and aware and attuned to the body, I think you get more of all those things to those other systems. So that's Laban and Bartenieff. This book for conductors is using those two systems to try to help them conduct with more ease and expressivity. And then my book, which I've been working on for a lot longer than that book, is called The Anatomy of Art. And it's a field guide for artists. It's I call it pocket mentorship. So I've done so much mentoring of artists in my career and life, and artists from like young college age, just making their first piece, to, peers and luminaries in the field who just want to rethink something. People quite a bit older than me, but like they've been doing it for so long, they just feel so habituated to themselves, they can't even see their own work anymore, and they just want an outside system, an outside eye. So I've done so much artistic mentorship. I found myself just asking questions and questions and questions. That's my main praxis with artists, is to ask them questions. I don't like to tell them what to do. I don't like to give opinions. I'm not saying I like this and I didn't like this and I think you should do that. That to me is quite abusive and transgressive. So I found myself mostly asking questions, which is a method that was pioneered by Liz Lerman, who's a choreographer in DC who works with intergenerational dancers and developed something called critical response process, a way of giving artistic feedback that's nonviolent. So at one point I kept noticing I would ask an artist a question, usually in a group of other artists, and something would happen in the room. I'd say the question, and not only the artist, but other artists in the room would go, that's the question. That's the question. Okay. Now I know what I want to do. And that's my favorite thing, is I don't want to tell an artist what I think they should do.
Right.
I want to ask a question that allows them to say, I know what I want. And that's what I was talking about in the beginning, helping people get in touch with their feelings. So this book is trying to do that practice through a book. So it started off as just a book of questions. And then I felt that lacked both context and vulnerability. So I said, I have to put myself on a line and make a statement too. I can't just ask questions. So I wrote an essay on each topic. There are 12 topics that I feel like each one is an integral part of art making: time, space, meaning, relationship, facts, faith, context and culture, material, etc. So there's 12 chapters, 12 topics. I eventually wrote an essay on each topic. I already had lots of questions on each topic. And then I was like, oh, maybe I should say something also even more personal than that essay. So I wrote a little, basically what you asked me for, like one time in your own personal art making process when this topic was transformational for you. One art making anecdote where you learned something about time. That Bates anecdote is in there around I forgot what section, but And then I was like, oh, but I want them to be able to work with this as well. So then I made a score for them to be able to take into the studio, which is basically like a little artistic obstacle course. You have to do this, but you can't do this. You have to do this twice, and then you have to do this, and you have to delete that, So a thing that just helps people, that's a new process. I never did that before. It just puts them in a new perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So it ended up being an essay, an anecdote, a score, an embodiment exercise, a creative exercise, a set of writing prompts, then all my questions. And then I was like, well, I haven't really said everything that needs to be said, of course, about this topic. So I thought, well, I'll recommend one book that's just on this chapter's topic. Who wrote an amazing book about time? Oh, David Abrams' book is great, But then there were so many books, I just made a whole reading list. So each chapter also has like a reading list of other books about just that topic, and then a bunch of viewing of artists who I feel like are excelling at using that particular facet of art. This artist uses time in this miraculous way. This artist uses space in this miraculous way.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like part essay, part memoir, part workbook, part library, and it's meant to be a pretty comprehensive friend to artists.
Yeah, it sounds like an extended book, and I say that in the sense that it's beyond two-dimensional pages with letters on them that are instructional nonetheless, but that this thing breaks out of itself and offers you those opportunities, which is kind of what, to go on a tangent, I guess what tech has afforded us. That tech is, it's nonetheless, the screen is 2D or whatever, but that the resource pipeline and the networking that's capable, and that the book, so that you're kind of bringing a published piece up to a speed that we can relate with now that we're all jaded by the immediacy and the repletitude of that's a silly word, but it's just the universe of what's going on in the availability of information and all these things.
And I think in a way it's trying to do both at the same time. And the book does really depend a lot on the idea that contradiction is an essential thing for us to accept as artists.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the book is trying to do both. It both allows you to have that, kind of ADHD focus. I say that as someone with ADHD.
Same here, yeah.
What I call constellatory thinking, in that you look up all these stars in the sky. A bunch of old men at one point said, oh, that's Capricorn, and that is, Archimedes. But you could look at the stars and just make your own pictures. So for me, all of those different ideas, everything I've read, every piece I've seen, every bit conversation I've had, is each one of them is a star, but so is the use of time, the use of space. So is, my history and memory. Each one is a star, and I can draw pictures and create constellations between them at will. And I'm interested in supporting other artists to be able to do that kind of thinking, but we have to depattern some habitual thinking in order to make new pictures, because we're used to there's Orion. Okay, but what if those 3 stars of the sword, what if one of them wasn't part of this picture and some of that was part of the picture? What picture do you see? And it's hard to do that when you're used to seeing Orion.
This is true. Plus the heuristic value of those constellations from, 100 BC or 200 BC. Our culture's moved on, It's still really novel, but yeah, it's nice that we can have that fluidity in constellational interpretation if we want, and if anything, it's just a beautiful metaphor for that which is, illuminated and never fixed, it appears fixed to us, but out there, just like our solar system, nothing is static, and that we can have that flexibility. And you've done me a favor, because the thing that I pinned earlier, you covered by talking, because I was going to bring up a video that you had about one bringing one's agency and dignity into an audition, and don't you dare let those stodgy old crusts from another generation tear you to shreds. And I appreciate that, because that radiates beyond just an audition. It's that which needs to sort of move on, and we don't need to do things that way, because it is a spirit crusher. We don't want that. And the whole point of I'm naive, but the whole point of arts and celebration of the arts is to elevate the spirit. So those working in the arts should not be crushed, so that others can feed on that. That would, to me, be insincere at that point. If the poor artist or the dancer is like, I fucking hate my life, but I'm going to perform for you anyway. Why not let that real spirit come out? And why not let that be enabled and enhanced by caring, empathetic, and by empathetic, I'll take one more step, like in touch, empathetic, reciprocal empathy, that they're feeling that person, and that they know if they support that person positively, that they'll get a better product, they'll get a better means to an end kind of thing, if it's all about the budget and the production and things. Strikes me as being intuitive, right?
One hopes.
Hey, are you seeing that progress? Are you seeing that again, we could bring Mel Brooks in, and like the producers and things like that. So I'll bring our friend Mel back. And that 1930s, that tough generation that had to get through the war and through the Depression. I mean, there's a reason why they're that hard. But are we seeing, again, more empathy, more?
Yeah. Well, I think two things are happening at the same time. I do think I'll call it our end. And what I mean is like the creators, the hirers, the producers, etc. I think there certainly has been quite a bit of reckoning, from Black Lives Matter to Me Too, and, a lot of different movements and actions that have made a lot of people in power realize, oh, right, that's abusive. We can't keep working that way. And then this generation, I mean, the millennial generation, I feel like started a reckoning in the way that my generation, Gen X, did not quite start a reckoning. We did a lot of rejection, a lot of subversion. You
were very cynical. A
lot of sarcasm. I think we broke a lot of things that needed breaking.
Right.
But we also were this like cusp generation where we still had a lot of internalized, isms. And then the millennials started, I think, looking at things differently. And to some degree, I think the pendulum, might have overswung a little bit. And now this generation, I feel like Gen Z into Gen Alpha, and I've got one of each as a child.
Okay.
Living with me in my house, so I get to see them a bit. They are standing up for themselves in the artistic workplace in a way that nobody ever has. On the other side of that, I feel like in higher education, in the arts, there's a little bit of a Wild West right now, in the sense that I feel like the pendulum swung quite far to giving students a lot of not just autonomy, but authority. A little bit too much, in my opinion, for their level of development, like social, emotional, ecological development. And what I'm finding with some of this generation as I'm teaching art students is that, they had this crazy, at some point, high school, middle school, high school, college, they had this crazy thing that happened to them with COVID. And they had a developmental pattern that none of us can really understand, even if we watched it happen. And I watched it happen to 2 kids, but I still don't really understand how that formed them socially, emotionally. But what I am experiencing as a teacher in higher education is that there's a lot of suspicion and like they're ready to fight. They're ready to fight, but they're not necessarily as nuanced as they might be, or taking in all of the data available to them to form that more educated, nuanced, benefit of the doubt, gray area, of like, okay, I'm going to assume that you didn't mean, but I'm feeling some offense from, like, I'm feeling a little hurt by that comment. I'd like to talk about it. That would be the way that I would love to talk about something, as opposed to like, you said this wrong. You're bad. There's a very quick knee jerk. I'm going to cancel you. And so I think that the people in my position, teachers, producers, et cetera, got a little skittish and started kind of over functioning and over compensating.
Okay.
Like, whatever you want, whatever you need, don't be mad at me. And I don't think it's working yet
Okay.
optimally. I think that undergrads at that age, 17 to 20, they need both. They need this like wide open, expansive space, lots of divergent thinking, opportunities, not knowing, boredom, figuring it out, etc. They also need to be held and framed and pressured. And there was a way that our generation was pressured that was not useful. The method wasn't useful, but the pressure was useful. And so there's something around like artistic rigor, intellectual rigor, and this is coming right as AI is coming in. And I love AI and I use it. And of course, we're in this like crazy, let's talk about Wild West reckoning in higher education with like, well, that whole paper was written by AI. And there is, even in that, some nuance and gray area around who's doing what, what's the goal? Is my goal to have you understand this well enough to give like the perfect set of prompts to AI? Because that could be a goal. And then I don't care who writes it. You can't publish it, but I don't care who writes it, right? That could be a goal for me as a teacher. Or do I not care at all about syntax and grammar and big vocabulary words? I just want to feel you, know you, give me poetry, write it in bullet points. I don't care. I just want to feel something authentic from you. That could be a goal. Neither one of them is necessarily good or bad. But I do think we're in a funky moment around power. And I do think, thankfully, this new generation of artists is like, no, I'm not standing for that. You can't talk to me like that. You got to pay me. You can't treat me like that. They're also a little bit hyper-vigilant, hyper-reactive, in my opinion or experience. It's not a conversation. It's not a dialogue. It lacks nuance. It sometimes feels like it lacks reciprocal humanity. Like, okay, but I'm also just a person standing here doing my best to create a frame for you. I hear that something's not working for you. I'd like to fix it, but I need you to talk to me like a human being, because you just attacking me isn't going to fix this problem. Now I just have to like repair myself from the attack, repair you from what you feel was an transgression. And we're not really working on the content of what upset you in the first place. We're just trying to repair this communication.
Yeah.
So I think there's evolution that's going to happen. I'm curious to see where it goes.
Yeah. It's all about fumbling and grasping and with the best of intention. Each generation hands the world off to another generation. And I think, as you've pointed out just now, I think, the boomers did what they did. We kind of did what we did as people who came of age in the Reagan era. And, the millennials inherited some of that. And I could say a couple cynical things about younger generations, but at the core, I think, as you've again demonstrated, that their compass is pointing in a good direction, and like you said, with a little bit of structure, a little bit of frame assistance, or whatever we're doing, that will produce further generations, B, C, whatever comes up, that can inherit the mantle, as they say, and move in a progressive direction. And I use progressive broadly, just like human flourishing progression, that we're not struggling with the same shit that everybody struggled with since modernity, right?
How we have to figure out how to create more trust from them to us, like from the student to the teacher. And, we were basically abused into blind, unregulated, untested trust in the authorities and our teachers. And this is what they said, so this is what it is, and you do it. Do the move, don't question it, don't tell me it hurts, and that was dance training. And it, that absolutely had to change. And then I feel like there's, you really have to prove yourself to every student fresh. I don't feel like I walk into rooms in higher education anymore and have them say, "Oh, yeah, I'd like to hear what you know." And I'm still going to stay tuned in. If I don't like the way it feels or I don't like the way you're talking, I will absolutely advocate for myself and, reject or whatever, change, shift, modify, walk out, whatever you need to do. But I'm going to assume that you've got some really juicy information and I'm eager to learn it. And I feel like that sometimes, but there are a lot of rooms I walk into where they're like, so, who are you and what's going on?
Mm-hmm.
And you're only as good as the last thing you said. And it takes a long time to prove yourself and build up that credibility. And I don't know what we need to shift from our end and what they need to shift from their end, but somehow we need to find more simpatico.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's two things that came to mind in what we've been talking about in the last few minutes. And one of them is one of the few things I took away in my formative years after high school, because I didn't go to college, was I took some community college courses. And out of that, there was something called Theory X and Theory Y of management. And Theory X was coercive, punitive management styles. And then Theory Y is rewarding, supportive, but, nonetheless structured, because you still, as a manager, you still want results. So, here's the Theory Y. And, Theory X, other than the military, I don't know where that really has good standing anymore, because it builds bad faith. It's like you said, you have cynical young people who, and again, that's where I think we started. That's where we got our leg up as teenagers, again, during the 80s. And, we're looking around and, things, they were kind of halcyon days compared to where the world's been going lately. But it's like, we thought at 18 or 16 or whatever, it's like, but anyway. Yeah, but I like the idea. I keep that in mind, at the Theory Y management system, and you could sprinkle a little X in every now and then, like you said, as a boundary or whatever. And you don't have to be coercive or violent in any way, but you use your creative human relation skills to figure out what's necessary. And what was the other thing that I thought of that just escaped my mind? Oh golly, well, it'll come to. I don't want to stall too much with dead air. Now we're closing in on an hour. So what I think I might want to ask of you is, and I do this with people who are doing really cool things, is let's vision future Imagineering, as Disney would say. What's down the road for you? Where do you want to? How do you want your path to unfold in the next few years? Is there any?
It's interesting. I feel like I spent a good 30 years doing that, thinking.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And a lot of it came to fruition as I envisioned it. Many things, as happens to most people, you're moving towards something and then, it takes you somewhere else and catalyzes something else.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of that envisioning and future planning. And I was talking to a friend of mine the other day. I'm in the middle of menopause and she is as well. And we were talking about the effect of it. Mm-hmm. And I said, I've been investing so much in these two different things, in creativity, like being a choreographer and director for theater predominantly, and somatics and healing people in groups and one-on-one. Mm-hmm. And I feel like I have a lot of curiosity and capacity and information about both of these, but it feels like if I'm really going to go all the way in one of them, I might need to let go of the other, or at least let go of the other. And I'm so attached to both of them, I don't know what to do. And now there's this third thing, which is writing. And she said, and this is why I bring this story up, she said, maybe in this moment of transition as a woman, or as a person in a menopausal body, maybe it's the time to just ride the momentum that you've spent so many decades fluttering your feet under the water. And maybe it's time to just ride it and see where it takes you.
Okay.
And so I can see one world in which, so I've done a lot of choreography for theater, predominantly off Broadway. One show almost went to Broadway and just production stuff didn't happen and it didn't go to Broadway. But I have been like a hair's breadth away from like, oh, I'm about to choreograph a Broadway show. And I absolutely see that as a potential outcome, as like, yeah, that's where I'd like to go. And it is a place I can imagine myself.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine myself not choreographing much at all for the rest of my life and becoming an incredible somatic practitioner, therapist, teacher, guide. Somebody that people come to and they're like, I can't move this thing. I've been trying for a decade in talk therapy and I can't move it. And
Right.
and I don't know what to do. I'm becoming, and then I have got like 3 more books that I want to write. So
Oh,
I see like 3 different paths, and I don't think that they can all happen in a lifetime. Will I just stay like holding all 3 and straddling them all and dabbling and maybe never getting to Broadway and maybe not writing 6 books and, maybe not becoming that like Gabor Mate genius, like, I'm one of the world's best healers, right?
Right.
Maybe none of those happen and I straddle all 3 of them. Maybe one of them I get an opportunity and I'm like, here we go, we're on the road. Maybe I give one up. It stops being compelling to me.
Okay.
I do feel committed to staying truthful around, what's ego and what's authentic.
Mm-hmm.
And right now I still deeply love choreographing and directing.
Okay.
But I can imagine a time might come where I'm like, I kind of feel done, which is what happened to me with performing. I had quite a career as a performer, and I could have kept performing and gone into another company or stayed in that company. I performed with my own company for a long time. And then at a certain point, I just was like, I'm done on stage. I have no interest in being visible in that way anymore. I don't need it. And then I just stopped and I basically never got on stage again. So I could imagine that happening with any of this. I just can't imagine what's going to happen. And I'm enjoying that, riding the wake of all of my effort.
I almost think that's a better muse, to be in uncertainty and to be, whatever you want to call it, just that you're not committing to something, because that way it's not giving you blind spots to what may be out there. So in other words, if there's X opportunity, but you're focused on Y opportunity, but that this is manifesting and you have to, So I think that's a really healthy place to occupy in your headspace and your emotional space and your active space to be loving and kind and generative to all of that, but at the same time, knowing that maybe that won't all get fulfilled. We're still relatively young. We're close in age, so you've got years. I'm going to say that for both of us. You've got years.
And then the other part of that is my partner said at one point when I was. I had just gotten this book deal from Bloomsbury for The Anatomy of Art. And he said, this book is going to really change things for you. And I was like, okay, I don't know, whatever, maybe. And I couldn't really picture that, but I just did this beta testing of the book. So 80 people asked to beta test it. I sent them each 1 chapter, and then I got a bunch of feedback from them and had a couple Zoom discussion groups and had a big questionnaire that they filled out. And the response to the book was a little shocking to me in a positive way, but in that they were like, this book is going to change things in the field. And I was like, what are you talking about? That's scary. That idea feels scary. And of course it may not, but the idea that the book might become more than just like, I see these art books, they come out, they're beautiful, you buy one, you put it on your shelf, and a couple years later that book's over, it's out of print, they didn't do another printing, the book's dead. And I sort of figured when I started writing this book, mine would be like that. But then there are these books that stand the test of time. And the response that I'm getting from the beta testers is like, oh yeah, this is one of those books. We don't have this book. There's nothing to replace it until somebody else writes another one. That this is going to be the book. And, I don't know if that's true. I don't know if they're right, but it's coming up as a possibility that the book could, quote quote unquote change things for me. And so I
Mm-hmm.
really can't imagine what that looks like because I don't
Yeah.
even know what that means.
Right, right. But aspirationally speaking and Imagineering speak, being the next in league with Gabor Mate or being someone who is working in Broadway or on Broadway, that's at that level. So that's encouraging, and that will give you the moxie and the chutzpah to feel that you can embody that aspect of yourself, that accomplished person, and the person who's not afraid to take in some positive feedback without it being an ego trip. You know, it's just that you are an accomplished person. You said it yourself. You've got 30 years invested in you and what you do, and others, of course. But you know that this is a what do they call them? Like a mutual fund or something that's maturing, you know, or a bond or something that's maturing, and
Yeah.
you can maybe see some, not to be crass and
Yeah.
capitalistic about it, but put it into that
Yeah.
metaphor. So yeah, I think, you know, that's awesome and that's so cool. And, you know, again, as we mentioned a moment ago, you're welcome to come in and talk if I can book you. If this book,
I'd be happy to.
I got the insight on this
The
interview.
advance.
So yeah, remember me, Justin here. You know, yeah, I'd love to be part of that. So now I did remember what I forgot my brain space thing a minute ago was that you'll appreciate is we were talking about X system, you know, crotchety old people telling you suck. When I was a kid, beset with all kinds of, you know, developmental issues and stuff and blah blah blah. And so the doctors were like, your child needs to engage in some sort of physical activity and blah blah blah. So my mother, being who she was, said, "Oh, Irish step dancing." You know, because she was dabbling in Irish nationalism at the time. We're like a fraction of Irish, but she just was her thing in the 70s. So she put me into Irish step dancing. And the teacher, and if there's anybody in the audience that knows Irish step dancing, her name was Peggy O'Neill. And she was an Irish grandmother, and she was stern, and you didn't cross her. But I made it through. But what an experience that was. And it was a interesting relationship. You had to wear a kilt at 7 and 8 years old. So I've learned to be comfortable in that, which whatever my, you know, who I am. Yeah, I'm good. And in fact, Michael Flatley, who was the river dance guy, who's just made a big thing about Irish step
Mhm.
dancing. Peggy O'Neill's daughter, Patricia, was the teacher to Michael Flatley. And when I would go to they called them Kayleys or Feshes, I think back then. It's hazy because it's been over 40 years. But I would see Flatley dancing. He was a couple years older than me in the more advanced categories, and fascinating to watch back then. And so yeah, it was a very enriching experience. But that same X Theory Peggy she was a force, and you did not cross her. And I used a bad word earlier. I was a bastard back then. I was a little 7-year-old, little hyperactive, just never, you know. So she was always screaming at me. I was disruptive and distracted and all this kind. But you know, in a way that probably, you know, like it steered me back in. But she was definitely X Theory. So anyway, I thought you might appreciate that.
Yeah.
I did step dancing for a few years, and somebody asked me the other day. In fact, a mom of one of my fellow students. 40 something years ago, we went out to lunch and she goes, "Do you remember any of those moves?" I'm like, "Hell no." I said, I blotted them out. I said, once I got done, I was done. I was, you know, because you're entering puberty at that point. You want to go do
Totally.
butch things. And, you know, I was like, I'm not going to dance. I'm going to go beat somebody up or get beat up and feel
Yeah,
good about
totally.
it. So, anyway, but so I thought you might appreciate that. Now, let's do this. If there's anything we haven't covered in this conversation that you would like to part with, let's open up that space. We'll talk for a few minutes, and then we'll call this one a conversation, and we'll definitely have you back for any occasion or celebration or whatever's going on.
I feel like we were so thorough. I don't have anything that's burning in my brain to share.
Okay. Okay. We did have a good conversation. We covered some ground. I think my audience will appreciate it because there's overlap here. You know, we're talking physical movement and flow, and we're also talking therapy and healing, as you said, and there's so much there that can be afforded us in these expressions.
Okay, here's one thing just based on what you just said, which
Okay.
is what I'm interested in and what I think we could all benefit from, artists, movers or not,
Mm-hmm.
is living in some of that interstitial space between what we might think of as a binary. And I'm not talking about gender. I'm talking
Yeah.
about, you know, it's this or it's that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's so much false thinking in binaries. And what you're talking about, this, disruptive negotiation, being coercive, where there's always a winner. I think with a binary, there's generally a loser. And
Mm-hmm.
so, we started off this conversation talking about humor and pathos, or humor and authenticity, being collaborative partners.
Mm-hmm.
They're not doing the same thing. They're in some ways doing opposite things and helping each other. They're both getting what they need out of the negotiation between humor and pathos, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's a more collaborative negotiation. I think a lot of times in different scenarios in our life, we put ourselves in, it's this or it's this.
Mm-hmm.
And, for an artist, it's between two decisions. But like when I folded my dance company, I remember talking about it to some people and saying that I had some grief about it. And immediately everyone was like, "Oh, then you shouldn't quit. You should have done it. You're so good at it." And I was like, "No, I want to fold it. And I'm sad. And it's the right decision. And I'm sad. Why can't those both be true?" And that exists on so many different spectrums for us that, rather than binaries, if we could start thinking in continuums and ranges, and groupings and Venn diagrams, I think that we would be healthier with ourselves and with each other, and better artists and writers and communicators.
Mm-hmm. You have spoken to my heart. This is a hill I'm willing to climb, defend, in as nonviolent a way as I can, but perhaps through communication, which is, like you said, false dilemmas, false dichotomies, binary thinking across the spectrum, everything. Because I think this binary is an artifact of the Enlightenment project. I'm go on a philosophical soapbox, but it really is an artifact of empiricism and rationality and logical thinking, which is not our nature. We are not. We are messy creatures. Rationality is good. We can embody rationality, but we also have to be the space. I took a quote out of "Joyfully in the mess of making" is something I copied that you had said in one of your websites. So 100%. Amen. Yes. And it's one of my missions is to break up false dichotomies and put things on a spectrum. And this sounds counterintuitive, but it could be called opponent processing, where you have poles, but they have to be in relation to one another. They're inextricably bound, and there is a spectrum, as you said, that we can oscillate on, like a musician goes through the range of notes. So it's there. It's
stability, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in movement, I talk about when we're seeking stability, we have two options. We can condense, which works well. That's like you're doing a sit up and you want stability and you tighten your abs. So
Mm-hmm.
that works. Or you're, getting up from a chair and you tighten your glutes and your quads, right? And we need to do that, right? We condense towards stability. You can also expand towards stability, like a suspension bridge, right?
Yeah.
So I just drove over the Brooklyn Bridge today and I'm looking like it's not condensing, it's creating stability by expanding, right? So we can do both, but we tend to bias towards finding stability through condensing.
Mm-hmm.
Physically and otherwise. And so feeling the stability of a continuum where you've got one thing here and it's pulling in oppositional force against something that does have an oppositional feeling to it, but it's not, well, I'm either here or I'm here. It's these both exist, so they both exist for me. I'm somewhere between the two poles. I might be really close to this pole at a given moment or really close to the other pole at a moment. I might live in between. There's no sweet spot until you have a goal for it.
Right.
Right? You have to have a goal. There's no like, well, that's how you should be. And of course, this is true for gender, but it way transcends gender.
Yeah, it's universal. It's universal in our human, the theater of human existence and experience. Yeah, and you mentioned biotensegrity in our pre-meet, 100%. that, or tensegrity as itself, as the Fuller, as Fuller would have stated. So, and when you said that, like I said, I lit up so much in the pre-me. In fact, I'm going to send you, I'll talk about this off record, but I'm going to send you the video. I found it the other day. So, because I was like gushing about this one gal that was talking about it. So we'll do that. Alexandra, we covered some really, wonderful terrain in this conversation. I appreciate that. Thank you for being my conversation partner in this and creating this product, that sounds crass, but it is a product that will go into the world and hopefully touch lives and get people thinking. So I appreciate that. I appreciate your time.
Thanks so much for having me, Justin.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, what I will do is we'll talk after I stop recording. To the YouTube audience, thank you so much. I hope this was a fruitful conversation for you as well. And subscribers, there'll be more conversations down the road, hopefully, and I'll see you in those. But anyway, thank you so much for being here for this conversation.
Thank you.